lanthanum aluminate strontium titanate quantum wells. I would like first to start with the acknowledgements. So this work has been a collaboration with many colleagues in my institute, in the Institute for Material Science of Barcelona. Especially, I would like to acknowledge Jaume Gázquez for scanning transmission electron microscopy. Also, Florencio Sanchez for the growth of the heterostructures. And also Max Stengel for density functional theory calculations. And I would also especially recognize the work of two PhD students. Now they are working as postdocs abroad, in Mateo Segai and Yu Chen. Also external collaborations, especially with the group Nicolas Berjal and also especially Gyanendra Singh, who has been at SPCI at Paris Tech in France, but now Gyanendra is here at ICMA, working in a project related to quantum oxide. And also I would like to acknowledge collaboration with the University of Caen in France, CNR in Italy regarding second harmonic generation, and University of Freiburg by infrared spectroscopy. Many of these results are not included in this presentation, but I would like to recognize all these collaborations and also funding from agencies, in different agencies. So let us start. So here, what I want to explain briefly is what is the interest of these oxide quantum wells. So the first place I would like to introduce very shortly the origin. How is this quantum well formed? And also the different interesting aspects of these quantum wells, because they have a combination of properties that make them interesting for several fields in fundamental research, but also potential in applications. It includes superconductivity, who has a two-dimensional character, Rashba spin orbit fields, some unusual photoresponses, and I would like to end up with a little bit of prospects in a very brief manner. So let us start with the quantum well. Which is the origin of this quantum well? Well, basically, as you see here, the materials involved are lanthanum aluminate and strontium titanate. Usually, the heterostructures are grown, so are prepared by growing lanthanum aluminate films by growth techniques. They usually are nanometric thin films grown on SrTiO3 crystals, and at the interface there is a high mobility electron gas, a two-dimensional electron gas. And it is noteworthy to say that these two materials are band insulators with large band gaps. So just by the combination of these two materials, there is a highly mobile electron system at the interface. And here you have a schematics of the structures. And one of the important points here is that this LaAlO film, this lanthanum aluminate, has an internal electric field because it's a polar material. And this internal electric field is what drives electrons from surface states to be transferred to the interface, forming a highly mobile system, which is confined in a few unit cells inside the SrTiO3 crystal. So, what are the basic properties of what are the basic properties of this system? The first place we should say that is metallic system. So here I show typical dependence of resistance, the sheet resistance versus the temperature. So basically, we see that in all the range of temperatures, it's a metallic behavior, and at low temperatures, mobility can be 1,000 centimeters square Vs, which can be even significantly larger. And indeed, at low temperatures, the mobility can be larger than in silicon, for instance. At room temperature, however, the mobility goes down to values typically to 1 to 5 centimeters square Vs. So what it looks like when we go to the atomic scale resolution. So here I show some of our studies in collaboration with my colleague John McGathke, who did scanning transmission electron microscopy. These are images with Z contrast. And here, the basic information that we can start here is that, first of all, we can grow these heterostructures in different crystal orientations. For instance, corresponds to a 001 orientation, meaning that the pseudo-cubic cell orientation has the vertical axis along the normal to the surface. And we see clearly by the stacking of the atomic positions here, where you see here the positions of LaO atomic ions and StO ions here. But also we can grow high quality interfaces along the 110 orientation, meaning that now the pseudo-cubic cell orientation is along this direction. And growing these quantum wells along different directions is crucial for some of the functional properties I will describe in the following. Additionally, EELS spectroscopy demonstrates that here we see different maps corresponding to lanthanum, titanium, and they show that they are atomically sharp. The interfaces are atomically sharp. So one interesting aspect of what happens when we studied using the transmission electron microscopy is that we could understand a little bit the competition between polar distortions and rotation patterns. So using the images by a transmission electron microscopy, we could pinpoint, for instance, the positions of the oxygen ions in the lattice. For instance, this is an image taken with a 3-unit cell thick LaO film. And by doing this, we could establish whether there was off-centering of the ionic positions, giving rise to polarization of the lattice. But also, we could track down the possibility that the octahedral structural units, which are characteristic of the perovskite unit cell, can show like tilting patterns schematically here. And we can extract this information from these maps. And what we discovered is that with the help of density functional theory calculations in collaboration with Max Stengel, is that there is a competition between these polar distortion and rotation patterns. And basically what happens is that when you have a very thin LaO layer, the presence of an internal electric field, remember that LaO is a polar material, suppresses these rotation patterns. And one of the interesting prospects of this finding is that in particular heterostructures, you could manipulate the rotation patterns of these structural units by switching on and off electric field. So basically, you could have bonding angles that could change by the application of electric field. This is a prediction that so far has no experimental verification. This is quite challenging. But at the theoretical understanding, this could be a possibility. So now, as I said before, having the quantum wells oriented along different crystal orientations is important because this has an implication in the functional and physical properties of these systems. And basically the reason is that when you change the crystal orientation, the relation of the symmetries of the orbitals of the electronic levels with respect to the lattice are changed. For instance, here you see schematically dxy, dyz, and dxz orbitals, and you see how the symmetry of these orbitals is related to the symmetry of the lattice that is changed when you go from 001 to 110 orientations. And basically, as we demonstrated in this reference using synchrotron radiation, is that the energy hierarchy, so how these orbital levels are ordered in the energy, is different for the two different orientations. For instance, in 001 oriented quantum wells, we have that the bottom levels have a dxy character with different effective masses than dxz and yz orbitals, which are high in energy. And here you see how the cross-section of the Fermi surface looks like for these different orbitals, meaning that dxy from this view, it has an isotropic view, but while the xky and kz have a quite anisotropic shape. But when you go to 110 oriented interface, the interesting thing is that now the hierarchy is reversed, and now the lowest energy are of a different symmetry. In this case, it's dxz, dyz, and the shape of the Fermi contours is a little bit is different. So this has implications in the physical properties. Let us start with the superconductivity. This study about superconductivity was reported a few years back in this reference. So now we have this structure where we can apply, for instance, these measurements were done with a back gate. This is a strontium titanate. So there is an application of a bias gate that goes to the two-dimensional system that is located here. Here is the ground. So basically what we can do is to apply electrostatic gating in a way that we can change the Fermi level, and so we can change the occupation of these electronic states. And this has consequences on the properties. In particular, we measure the sheet resistance as a function of the temperature. When we apply, for instance, a highly negative voltage like here, what we are doing is depleting the quantum well. We are removing electrons from the quantum well. And when we are at these gatings, basically what we have is this dependence. But when we change the voltage towards the positive values, there is a transition developing, showing a superconductance transition, as is shown here. So in this region, which is corresponding to these values of the electrogating, we observe a superconductivity transition typically is in the range of 200 or 100 millikelvin, more or less. But in the 001 orientation, when you increase more and more the voltage, so when you are putting more and more and you are overlapping the quantum well with electrons, finally you kill again the superconductance. So there is like a kind of dome, which is seen in many superconductors, by the way. So basically there is superconductivity region signal here for 001 orientation. But what happens in 110 orientation is different. Here, again, we observe a transition to superconductivity in a similar range of temperatures, but now in the range of the values for the gating, this is not suppressed. And the basic reason is that if we go back to the hierarchy of electronic structure, what we see is that in 110 orientation, the first levels that are occupied are these dxz and dyz energy, which have larger density of states, and this explains why the superconductivity is more robust, because having a larger density density states, according to the BCS theory, is favoring superconductivity. So this is one particular instance where the particular energy landscape and symmetries of the orbitals in the quantum wells have important consequences on the physical properties. Now, if we go to the Rashba spin orbit fields, similar implications also hold. For instance, why is important Rashba spin orbit fields? Basically, in the presence of quite asymmetric system, a non-central symmetric system like this quantum well, where there is an asymmetry due to the confinement of electrons at the interface, you have that in the reciprocal space there is a splitting of the Fermi contours depending on the spin direction. So basically, what happens is that there is a momentum dependence of spins. So basically, they don't share the same momentum in the reciprocal space, and this is what is called Rashba spin orbit field, which is driven by this spin orbit coupling. And this is interesting for spintronic applications because this is a way to manipulate the spins of the electrons. And what we did here in this work is to study these spin Rashba spin orbit coupling as a function of the electron gating, as we did before, but now paying attention to this spin orbit coupling. And for that, what we did is measure magnetoconductance as a function of the magnetic field. Here are different curves for different gate voltages for 110 orientation and for 001 orientation of the quantum well. And what we did is to extract the effective magnetic field due to this spin orbit interaction, studying the weak localization using the Maekawa-Fukuyama formula, analyzing these magnetoconductance experiments with this, and we could extract this parameter that relates to the spin orbit coupling as a function of the voltage gate, and we see that whereas in 110 orientation there is a weak dependence on the gate, for 001 direction, the spin orbit strength can be largely modulated. Another thing that is important for the electronic landscape, the different orientation or the different hierarchy of the orbital levels, is regarding the possibility and the fact that we demonstrated recently that there is a gate tunable multicondensate superconductivity. This work was done in collaboration with Nicolas Berjal at SPCI in Paris Tech in France. And here the purpose was to look at the superfluidity, superconductance stiffness that is trying to measure the stiffness using a microwave resonance circuit. And the idea is that this resonance microwave circuit has its own resonance, but there is a coupled to the circuit, there is the sample, which in this case is the quantum well oxide. And when the quantum well oxide enters into the superconductive regime, there is a shift of this resonant frequency, And these give us an idea about how the superconductivity evolves with the voltages, with the applied voltages. And this was interesting because what we observe, again, as a function of the electrostatic gauging, is that there is a region that we call underdoped that can be described with a single band BCS theory, which is basically all curves can collapse into a single one that can be described by a single band BCS theory. But when we go to the overdop region, so when we change the electrogating, so we are putting more and more electrons in the quantum well, it happens that this departs from the single band theory, and we have to fit with a two-band system. So basically what we have is a two condensate, and that can be reached when you increase the gating into the overdop region. And what is interesting is that when we fill this second band, the transition temperature, instead of increasing, that would be the intuitive idea that you increase the number of bands that are superconductive, and one would say in a first sight that this should increase the TC because of the increase of the density of states. Here, what we observe is a decrease. So when you go from a single band superconductivity to a two-band superconductance, TC is not increasing, is decreasing. And this we explain by an S plus minus wave pairing between the two condensates with a repulsive interband coupling, which is described by this. The details can be found in this reference. Now I am going to another interesting properties of these quantum wells, but of a very different kind. Recently, we have observed an interesting photo response. Basically, what we did was to measure the transfer properties. This is an schematics of one of the devices. So we inject current here, we measure voltages, and at the same time, we illuminate locally with a confocal microscope the bridges of a whole bar device. This is a real picture of one of the devices, and this is a cross-section of one of these devices obtained by electron microscopy. And what we observe is very interesting. Pay attention first to the blue line. The blue line corresponds to changes in the conductance induced by illumination. But in this case, the illumination is done by pulses that are all of the same wavelength in the blue. So basically, we start from the initial conductance, and then at the first pulse, the conductance increases. The pulse now is off, so there is a little decrease. Then a second blue pulse comes in, and there is another jump. Then subsequently, other pulses have this effect. And there is one first interesting thing, is that when you remove the illumination, the changes in conductance are plastic. So the conductance is not going to the initial state, so is plastically changed. And another observation is that if now we introduce red pulses intercalated with blue pulses, what we see is that there is an increase and decrease of the conductance depending on the wavelength. So for instance, a first blue pulse increases the conductance, a red pulse decreases, and so on. So basically, we can adjust the plasticity of this conductance by putting pulses of light with different wavelengths and changing the order of these pulses changes the plasticity of these conductance. This is very interesting, and this, I cannot go into the details. This is because there are two phototransfer processes, one which involves direct transport from defects to the quantum well, and another one that involves quantum tunneling. But here the interesting thing is that we can play plastically with the conductance, and this plasticity can increase or decrease depending on the wavelength of the pulses and the time order of these pulses. And this is very interesting, for instance, for applications in neuromorphic applications, for instance, where you can have inhibitory and excitatory pulses. But here, the interesting thing is that this is not done electrically. This is done by optical means. So this is we can think about this conductance of the quantum well as a kind of a synapse whose strength can be varied by the time order of optical pulses and their wavelength. So now I think I'm going to the end of my talk. So I would like just to give two possible interesting prospects of these kind of systems. First of all, I think this kind of systems could be interesting for some applications in spintronics. Recent findings, you can, for instance, check this very recent publication, which is a nice review about this spin charge interconversion in these systems. And this could be this could be used for spintronic applications. And there are interesting effects related to non-trivial spin structures in the electronic band structure of this system. And another interesting prospect is that of unconventional superconductivity and the possibility of developing topological quantum physics with this. And the basic thing is that, remember that previously I mentioned that this system have a strong spin-orbit coupling due to the Rashba effect. So the combination of superconductance and strong spin-orbit coupling can give rise to the possibility of generating triplet copper pairs. And this is interesting for different fields, for instance, in superconductivity spintronics, or interesting in this field that I mentioned about topological quantum physics. For a nice review on these prospects, I also recommend this recent publication also that reviews this matter. Okay, so this brings me to the end. So basically, what are the basic takeaways that I would mention? So these oxide quantum wells, I have talked specifically about lanthanum aluminate, strontium titanate oxide quantum wells because this was the first of this kind discovered, and this the one that has been more exhaustively studied. But over the years, many other oxides have been studied, different from these ones. These kind of quantum wells, as I said, this can give interesting inroads in topological matter. It's spintronics due to the property of Rashba spin orbit fields, and basically, and additionally, one possibility is this kind of unusual photoresponses could be of potential interest also for the field neuromorphics. And so I think that's the end of my talk. It would be my pleasure to take up any question that you might have, and just I will end up by thanking you your attention.